The sun had barely touched the sleepy hills of Bethsaida when Simon, a sturdy man in his 30s, stood at the edge of Lake Gennesaret. His feet were planted in the cool sand, and his calloused hands gripped the coarse net that sagged heavy with salt water and disappointment. Fish had eluded him all night. Behind him, the faint chatter of early traders floated in the wind, mixed with the bleating of goats and the splash of oars. He didn't speak. He didn't sigh. But something in the stiff way he pulled the net showed he was worn and restless inside. Simon had always lived near the water, born in the small fishing village of Bethsaida, along the northern shore of the Sea of Galilee. The lake was his cradle, his school, and his future. As a child, he had watched his father wrestle with nets and winds, and as he grew, he inherited the same fight. The work shaped his hands and hardened his skin. People knew him by the sun in his beard and the strength in his arms. But lately, something inside him felt like a tide refusing to settle. The morning air was thick with the smell of wet rope and crushed sardines, but Simon wasn't focused on the lake anymore. As he mended a torn piece of net, his eyes kept drifting toward the shore, toward the crowds gathering around a strange man who had been walking from village to village. Word had it that this man healed the sick, touched the broken, and taught like no rabbi they had ever known. Simon didn't believe in stories, but something about this man made his heartbeat flicker like a candle in wind. His younger brother, Andrew, had become fascinated by the man. He whispered things at night, wild things, about signs and truths in a kingdom not made of silver or spears. Simon would nod and return to his nets. But when Andrew vanished early that morning to find the man again, Simon had watched him go with something like envy buried deep behind his stern eyes. He didn't know what he wanted. But he knew it wasn't just more fish, more sails, more storms. Back in town, Bethsaida buzzed with voices. Some laughed, others argued about miracles. A man claimed he saw a woman's twisted hand straighten. Another swore that a blind boy now chased birds in the field. Simon didn't say much. He wasn't a fool. He had seen charlatans before. Still, he couldn't ignore the way people spoke the name, Jesus. Not like gossip. Not like curiosity. But like thirst. Like hope. Like it was something you could hold if only you reached fast enough. The lake called him again. The day had grown hotter, and the water shimmered like glass. Simon pushed his boat into the shallows, more out of habit than purpose. As he stepped inside, something strange happened, something small, but it made the hairs on his arm rise. The same man everyone talked about was standing just a few feet away, staring at Simon's boat. Without a word, the man climbed in. He used Simon's boat as a stage to speak to the crowd that pressed close to the shoreline. Simon stayed silent, frozen. The man's voice was not loud, but it cut through the air like a knife through cloth. Words about forgiveness. About letting go. About nets that break and hearts that mend. Simon didn't understand everything, but it felt like the man was reading his soul, sentence by sentence. He tried not to care, but something deep inside had begun to shift, like sand underfoot. When the man finished teaching, the crowd melted away. Then he turned to Simon and pointed back toward the deep water. Simon hesitated. He had fished all night and caught nothing. But something in the man's eyes made excuses feel weak. He rowed out again, almost against his own will. The nets dropped. Minutes later, they were overflowing. Fish thrashed and spilled, boat creaking under the weight. Simon stared at the miracle with a mix of fear and awe. Something greater than fish had just been caught. That moment changed Simon. He left everything, boat, net, routine, and followed the man whose name was Jesus. The lake that once ruled his life was now behind him. A new storm had begun, one that wouldn't be fought with oars or rope. As they walked away from the water, Simon felt like he was stepping off the edge of something known and into a wild sea of mystery. He didn't look back. But a voice inside him whispered, "This is only the beginning." They traveled from town to town. Dust rose around their sandals. Crowds followed, desperate for healing. Simon watched Jesus touch the eyes of the blind, place fingers in the ears of the deaf, and raise hands toward the dead. Each time, the impossible obeyed. Simon's heart struggled to hold all the wonder. Sometimes, it felt like his mind couldn't stretch wide enough to believe what his eyes saw. And yet, he kept following. Not just because of the miracles, but because Jesus saw something in him no one else did. One night in Capernaum, Simon sat beneath a fig tree while Jesus prayed alone. The stars above seemed brighter, as if heaven leaned closer. Simon had questions he couldn't ask and feelings he couldn't name. He wasn't a wise man. He wasn't a teacher or a priest. Just a fisherman who sometimes spoke too fast and acted before thinking. Yet Jesus kept him close. And for reasons Simon couldn't explain, that closeness felt like the only thing that mattered anymore. Still, not all moments were warm. There were storms. Real ones, and the ones inside Simon's chest. Once, they crossed the lake at night, and waves rose like walls. Simon thought they would die. But Jesus, standing on the water like it was dry ground, calmed the sea with just a hand. The others whispered in fear, calling him the Son of God. Simon said nothing. But deep inside, something cracked open. Like a shell breaking. Like a hard heart softening for the first time. Not everyone loved Jesus. The more he healed, the more powerful people grew afraid. Priests watched from shadows. Soldiers listened from corners. Whispers of danger began to wrap around their little group like thorns. But Simon stayed. He had seen too much to turn back. Besides, Jesus had once looked him in the eye and said, "You are Peter the rock." Simon didn't know what it meant, but the name clung to him like a prophecy he hadn't yet grown into. By now, Peter, the name Jesus gave him, had become something of a leader among the disciples. People looked to him when decisions needed to be made. He walked taller, but not prouder. The old Simon would have bragged. But Peter had seen too many sick people healed and too many storms calmed to think it was about him. He knew now, strength wasn't in muscle or mind. It was in following, even when you didn't know where the road led. One afternoon, Jesus took Peter and 2 others to a high mountain. There, something happened that Peter would never forget. Jesus glowed. Not with sweat or sunlight, but with light from somewhere beyond. His clothes turned white as snow. His face shone like lightning. And then 2 ancient prophets, Moses and Elijah, stood beside him, speaking as if they had never died. Peter trembled. The ground felt like it might split beneath him. For a moment, heaven had touched earth, and Peter was standing in the center of the spark. After that day, Peter became both braver and more afraid. Braver, because he knew Jesus wasn't just a healer or teacher. He was something holy, something from God's own throne. But more afraid, because he sensed that this journey might not end in safety. Danger was rising like dark smoke on the horizon. Jesus began to speak of death, of betrayal, of a cross. And Peter didn't understand how such a light could be snuffed out. But the fear stayed with him like a stone in his chest. Then came the night that would shake everything. The night air in Jerusalem carried a strange heaviness, like the sky itself was waiting to weep. Peter sat near the olive trees of Gethsemane, his hands clenched, his heart pounding. They had just finished supper, Jesus called it his last, and now they were in a garden, far from the city lights. Shadows danced across the dirt. Somewhere in the distance, dogs barked and a baby cried. Peter's thoughts were a whirlwind. Jesus had washed their feet. He had broken bread and said it was his body. And then he spoke of betrayal, as if one of them would do it. Peter didn't want to believe it. His face had twitched in protest. He had promised he'd never leave, never deny, never fail. But deep in his stomach, something twisted. He remembered Jesus' words. "Before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times." Peter shook his head as if he could shake the prophecy loose. Still, fear had started to spread through him like cold water through cloth. He tried to push it down. He tried to be strong. But something in the air told him strength would not be enough. The silence shattered. A mob arrived, priests, soldiers, torches blazing like a parade of nightmares. Peter watched in horror as Judas, one of their own, stepped forward and kissed Jesus on the cheek. That one simple act made Peter's blood run cold. Suddenly swords flashed. Peter reacted without thinking. He grabbed a blade and struck a man's ear. But Jesus, calm even now, told him to stop. Peter froze. His courage melted. He felt like a boy holding a wooden toy, not a man in a battle. Jesus was taken away like a criminal, bound and beaten. Peter followed at a distance, slipping through alleyways and hiding behind carts. His heart beat louder than his footsteps. He wanted to help, but didn't know how. Every door seemed locked. Every path felt cursed. He finally stopped near a courtyard, where the guards warmed themselves by a fire. He crouched in the shadows, hoping to stay invisible. But fate had other plans. A servant girl pointed. "Weren't you with him?" Peter shook his head. "No," he whispered. The first denial. Moments later, another voice. "You're one of them!" Panic surged. "I'm not," he replied, louder this time. The second denial. The fire crackled. His hands trembled. Then a man spoke. "You talk like a Galilean. You must be with Jesus." Peter snapped. "I don't know him." The third denial. Then came the sound he would never forget, the crowing of a rooster. It sliced through the air like a blade. Peter turned, and saw Jesus looking at him. No anger. Just sadness. Deep, bottomless sadness that pierced Peter's soul. He ran. The world blurred around him. Streets. Stones. Tears. His chest burned with shame. How could he have fallen so far, so fast? He had sworn loyalty. He had promised strength. Yet when the moment came, fear made him a liar. He collapsed in an alley, trembling and broken. The same hands that once pulled heavy nets now shook with guilt. The same mouth that once shouted truths had just spoken cowardice. Peter didn't deserve forgiveness. He didn't deserve to be called the Rock. He didn't even deserve his own name. The next days passed like a nightmare. Jesus was mocked, tried, whipped, and nailed to a cross. Peter did not go near. He heard the screams from afar. He saw the darkness cover the land. He watched from a distance as the man who had walked on water now hung from wood. Each nail felt like it pierced Peter's own chest. Each cry from the cross echoed through his shame. He wanted to scream. He wanted to undo time. But all he could do was weep, hidden from view, crushed by his own failure. Then, on the third day, rumors spread like wildfire. The tomb was empty. Women said they saw angels. Others claimed to see Jesus alive. Peter didn't know what to believe. His heart ached with confusion. Could this be true? Could death be undone? Then one morning, while sitting near a sea he once knew so well, Peter saw a figure on the shore. A fire. Fish roasting. A voice calling, "Come and eat." Peter's breath caught. He leapt from the boat and swam ashore. And there he was, Jesus, alive. Peter's heart pounded as he sat beside the fire. It felt like that first day again, the day of the miracle catch. But this time, the miracle wasn't fish. It was grace. Jesus looked at him, not with anger, but with love that was stronger than death. Peter didn't know how to explain the feeling. It was like being rebuilt from inside, like broken bones being made whole. In that moment, he realized something deep: forgiveness is more powerful than failure. And love doesn't walk away. From that day forward, Peter changed. Not in pride, but in purpose. He had been broken. He had denied. But he had been restored. He no longer followed Jesus as a teacher or healer. He followed him as one risen from death. And this time, Peter didn't walk behind. He walked with boldness. Even when Jesus ascended into heaven, disappearing into the clouds, Peter did not return to fishing. He returned to Jerusalem with fire in his chest and a message in his bones. On the day of Pentecost, the streets buzzed with pilgrims from every land. Then came a roar, like wind, like thunder. Tongues of fire danced on the disciples' heads. Peter stood up, once timid, now fearless. He preached with power. His voice shook the hearts of thousands. People who once scoffed now listened. Many were baptized. That day, a church was born, and Peter stood at its heart like a lighthouse in a storm. Not perfect, not proud, but faithful. The rock had found his footing. But boldness brought danger. The same city that crucified Jesus now hunted his followers. Peter was arrested, beaten, and warned to be silent. But silence no longer lived in him. He kept preaching. He healed the sick in Jesus' name. His shadow passed over the lame, and they stood. He spoke in crowded temples and dark prisons. Each time, his words carried one truth: Jesus was alive, and he had forgiven the world. Nothing could shut Peter's mouth now. Not chains. Not threats. Not fear. Still, the cost was high. Friends were killed. Stephen was stoned. James was beheaded. Blood stained the streets of Jerusalem. Peter grieved, but he did not retreat. He led the disciples with courage, guiding them like a shepherd. He wrote letters of hope to believers scattered across cities. He reminded them of Christ's love, of the reward waiting beyond pain. He taught them not to be afraid. Because he, too, had once been afraid, and yet Jesus had not let him go. In the shadows of empire and the fires of persecution, Peter shone like a lantern. He traveled beyond Judea, spreading the gospel to Gentiles, to strangers, to those the world forgot. He told of his denial not to hide it, but to prove that grace is real. That even the weakest can rise. That even the fallen can lead. His story was not about his strength. It was about the one who picked him up, again and again, until he stood firm as the rock he was named to be. But storms never stay far from the faithful. Rome was colder than Jerusalem, both in weather and in heart. Stone buildings towered like giants, and smoke drifted from the chimneys of soldiers and merchants who never cared for tales of fishermen and crosses. Peter, now an old man, walked its cobbled streets quietly. His beard was long and white, his back slightly bent. But his eyes still burned with a fire that age could not quench. People passed him without knowing they were brushing shoulders with a man who had once walked beside the Son of God. He did not seek attention. But heaven was watching. In secret houses and hidden rooms, Peter preached. The Roman Empire was vast and full of gods carved from marble, but none could speak like Christ. The gospel moved like wind through alleyways, whispered from lips of slaves, sung in prayers of mothers, scribbled in letters smuggled across borders. Peter, their shepherd, fed them with truth. He reminded them that suffering was not defeat. That Christ had suffered too, and risen. That weakness could still be strength, and ashes could still bloom into something eternal. Every time he taught, his heart grew heavy. Not with sorrow, but with longing. He missed Jesus. Not a memory, not a ghost, but a friend who once walked dusty roads and shared quiet meals by the sea. Sometimes Peter would close his eyes and remember the touch of Christ's hand on his shoulder, the calm in his voice during a storm, the gentle rebuke that felt like love. He no longer feared death. To him, death was just a door back into the arms of the one he had once denied, and later served with all his soul. But Rome was no friend to faith. Emperor Nero had lit the city on fire and blamed the Christians. In dark corners, Peter heard whispers, arrests, burnings, crucifixions. The streets grew tense. One by one, the believers around him were taken. Some fled. Some hid. Others stayed and paid with blood. Peter remained. Not because he was brave, but because he knew running would only silence the voice that had once saved him. And he had promised, this time, he would not run. Not from fear. Not from pain. Not from the cross. One night, as the sky turned violet with the coming dawn, Peter prayed alone. He knelt in a small room lit by a single flame. His bones ached. His breath was short. But his soul stood tall. He prayed for the church, for the weak, for those who still trembled. He prayed for the strength to endure. Then, as if summoned by that very prayer, the door burst open. Iron-clad men entered. No shouting. No struggle. Peter rose slowly. He had been waiting. The time had come. They dragged him through the streets, where merchants stared and children gawked. He didn't speak. He didn't beg. The guards pushed him toward a hill just outside the city. A place of death. A place of final words. As he walked, the air smelled of firewood and wet earth. In the distance, dogs barked. The sky was gray. Not stormy, not clear. Just like his thoughts, quiet, expectant, resolved. The cross stood tall, ready for him. But Peter had one request. Not out of pride, but of humility too deep to measure. He asked to be crucified upside down. The soldiers were puzzled. But he insisted. He didn't feel worthy to die the same way his Lord had died. He wanted even his death to be a sign, not of pain, but of honor. Not of pride, but of love. They agreed. And so, on that dark morning, the fisherman who once sank into the sea now rose in heaven's eyes. Blood spilled on Roman soil. Bones broke. But Peter's spirit did not. As the world blurred and breath left his lungs, he felt not terror, but peace. A peace that passed understanding. And then light. A warmth not of fire, but of glory. He saw him. Christ, standing with arms open. Not on water. Not on a mountaintop. But in the place where all tears are wiped away. Peter smiled as his spirit rose. He was finally home. Centuries passed. Empires rose and fell. Yet Peter's name never faded. Across the earth, cathedrals and cities bear his memory. But more than that, he lives in the stories told from pulpits, in the hearts of preachers, in the courage of those who fall and rise again. His legacy was not perfection. It was perseverance. His crown was not gold. It was faith tested by fire. His life was proof that God does not call the flawless, but the willing. Peter, the fisherman. Peter, the coward. Peter, the rock. And in the end, Peter, the saint. Moral lessons from the life of St. Peter. Peter's journey shows that God uses the broken. He was impulsive, fearful, even ashamed. Yet Jesus called him the rock. Why? Because Peter was honest, passionate, and willing to grow. His failures did not disqualify him, they prepared him. His fall did not end his story, it gave it depth. Children, youth, even adults can learn this. You don't have to be perfect to follow God. You just have to be open. Peter teaches us that even when we deny, we can be restored. Even when we sink, we can walk again. Even when the world condemns us, Christ forgives. And that is enough.